good afternoon, as the case may be, wherever you're joining us from across this beautiful country. My name is Devon Gillard. I'm the CMO of F12.net, and we have a very special topic today. We're going to take a little bit of a different tack. This is going to be a bit more of a technical discussion. I'm joined by my friends from iTel, and we had planned a discussion. Frankly, whenever I speak with these folks, I learn something new about connectivity, about what's happening with data, about what, we're talking about space, we're talking about regulations. I always learn so much, and I'm really excited to share this knowledge with all of you because it changes a lot. And we'll do introductions in just a second, but I also wanted to say, for this purpose, I get to play a little dumb, because I think it's fair to say that when you talk about telephony, nowhere else on earth do I think there's more acronyms. I mean, it started way back with like T4s and ISDN and ADSL and EADSL, and it just continues on. So I'm going to be a little bit of the acronym cop here and ask for explanations and make sure we all follow along, because this is going to be a more technical discussion than we generally have on our webcasts. And we had set this discussion ahead of time. I had no idea that on Friday Rogers would have a giant outage and this would become a hot topic. Maybe it's our fault, but we'll address that and many other topics in the discussion today. Few housekeeping rules before we get into it. This is a webcast. We're live. There's a Q&A on the side there. Go ahead and throw in any questions you might have. We'll do our best to answer them organically as we're doing the discussion. But if not, we'll get to them at the end for whatever time we have left. We have a lot of contents. We'll be moving a little bit quickly. The other thing is that we'll have a recording of this. So if you have to leave or you want to watch it later, we'll be sharing out a recording of this as well as a synopsis, which will be posted on our blog, on our website, f12.net. Easy to find us. It's our name. Excellent. Well, first of all, some quick introductions to our friends at iTel. And first of all, let me just say how F12 works with iTel. So we've had a relationship with iTel that goes back many years. We're a multi-sort organization. We have a complex connectivity needs of our own. But beyond that, we have data centers, which have to have multiple aggregate connections, high reliability. We have transfer that goes through Canadian sovereign from data center to data center. So we're backing up our clients and able to do wonderful things like geo-replication and geo-redundancy. And behind the scenes is iTel that's helping make that happen for F12. So not only do we recommend them to help our clients have affordable yet flexible connectivity solutions, but we also rely on iTel. So without further ado, let me introduce Dan Rink, who is the CEO of iTel. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Devon. I'm really happy to be here.
Excellent. And Kelly Pritchard, who is the CRO of iTel. Kelly's been around I guess you could say the telecom industry for a very long time. Is that right, Kelly?
Yeah, I'm getting older here.
That's not what I meant. Pardon me. I just meant she's had different roles with different organizations, has a really broad perspective on the telecom world and connectivity in general. And Humphrey, Kim and I, we work together quite closely. She's a national channel manager. So when our clients need unique solutions, it's Kim that helps the folks at F12 figure out how we're able to get connectivity solutions. So happy to have you all three. This is a tremendous brain trust, not on my part, on this call to talk about connectivity. So again, any questions, any comments that you have, we are excited to get into them.
Absolutely.
Well, wasn't going to be the first topic, Dan, but with the recent Rogers outage, let's get the hot news off the topic. Like, what happened there? What do we know about what happened, and what light can you shed about it and what it means for the business community?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Rogers has gotten a lot of bad press on this, and I want to start by saying all carriers have outages, right? Accidents happen, cars hit poles, landslides wipe out rails in BC and take down national fiber. This is not a new or unique thing, and this one was particularly long, nearly a whole day. But again, not unique, almost the exact same reasoning as Rogers had 14 months ago, an update gone wrong. And when you think about it, these carriers are powered by humans who make mistakes. Their vendors make mistakes. Their software updates that cause problems. Shocking that it went on as long as it did. But at the same time, I mean, no one should be putting all their eggs in one basket at this point. This is the reason technologies like SD-WAN exist, and the reason why the network world is going the direction it is. We're moving away from MPLS and expensive fiber connections. We're going to SD-WAN with multiple broadbands controlled and shaped by these next generation appliances and technologies, specifically for this reason. You're alleviating your risk, you're lowering your cost, you're having a basket of connectivity options. If that's a mix of GPON fiber with fast, next generation cable with 5G modem as a tertiary backup. And you're paying less than you would have paid 3 years ago for an enterprise circuit from a single carrier, right? And so this is sort of a wake-up event for people that, that the reason that is growing so quickly in the enterprise space is for exactly this reason. This will happen, you know, and this is not a game of Russian roulette that anyone should be playing, because frankly, every carrier in Canada has had a national outage within 4 years.
Yeah, I could think, I'm in Calgary. Happy Stampede, everybody. Got my cowboy attire on. And I know we've had a couple from provincial providers and national providers, and they're painful. This one seems to be getting more attention, perhaps because it's the second one for Rogers. But also what surprised me a little bit was some of the major providers, like we heard a lot about Interact, that seemed very, very reliant on Rogers, and maybe disproportionately so. Do we know why they wouldn't have redundancy, why some of the payment systems would crash in an event where there's a single ISP outage?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at the Canadian landscape, especially in sort of LTE cellular networks, and so if you think of point of sale, Interact, Visa, frankly, most of those point of sale terminals in Canada run on LTE. They run on cellular. And Rogers is a major player, really, frankly, in Canadian network, like one of two. You have TELUS and Bell, who more or less share towers. You have a bunch of flanker brands that they've created, and then you have Rogers. And Rogers has been a cost leader for many years and is a heavy player in the IoT and point of sale space. And so Rogers having a national outage means a whole lot of point of sale terminals were just hard down, right? Those in your gas stations and your convenience stores. And a lot of those companies are working on migration to SD-WAN. Most of them have, RFPs out and are doing that transition, but a lot of them are still just single modem, single carrier. And when that carrier goes down, they're down. That's
okay. Yeah. So it's the redundancy, which might get into it. Maybe we could talk a little bit about how iTel plays into there. I shouldn't assume that the audience necessarily knows who you are. So Kim, maybe that's a good one for you to take, about how iTel fits into the landscape and how you play with ISPs in general and how you solve this challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the reasons that iTel exists is just because, we utilize the infrastructure of all the different carriers in Canada and bring it back to our network that's across the country. And really what we're trying to do is give the most robust networks and service to customers, because like Dan said, outages do happen, whether it's software updates or mudslides or human error. And, this one was quite public, but it could be, just in your neighborhood or your municipality, and they do happen, every year. So really what we're recommending to customers is that they're utilizing the power of SD-WAN. They have multiple different carriers at each location. And it's sort of a sweet spot where iTel, can really tap into all of our networks, and we can look at what's available at your location and see, do we want to do maybe a cable connection and then 2 diverse LTE networks? So you have 3 different carriers. Do you want to look at shared fiber? Do we want to look at dedicated internet? And then another thing that's really important is just the cost of internet's going down over years, which is really great. So, 4 years ago, we would see 1 gig dedicated fiber connection selling for maybe $1,500 a month. Now I'm seeing them for maybe sub $1,000. So there's so many opportunities out there to make your network more resilient and also to save money. SD-WAN has a lot of functionality, and making sure that your business is always up is really important, because you have to ask yourself, if I'm down for a couple hours or a day or a couple days, how much does that cost my business? If you're doing $30,000 in transactions a day, just throwing out a number, and a circuit's $150 a month extra, there's a really clear ROI. We just want to be asking ourselves those questions and kind of framing it that way.
I mean, there's the resiliency, but there's also the simplicity that I know is so powerful from the services, because, if you're 1 or 2 locations and you're well served by a single provider, it might just make sense to go directly to TELUS, directly to Rogers and all the rest. But I know for our locations, this provider is the best in this location. This one's okay, but doesn't have enough bandwidth. We need to aggregate from somebody else. Over here, it's another one. And then in our data centers, we better have more than one provider, and iTel makes that one relationship. So just in case people are wondering where they play, yeah, your endpoint could still be riding on other people's networks, but all that complexity, all that management is all extracted away, and you can just consume internet. Good example.
Yeah,
You know, there's
sure.
outages, and you brought up the point, Kim, that there's also local ones, and those are sometimes, I think, the more painful, because there's a lot of sympathy from your clients and your vendors and everybody when the whole country's down. They go, oh, it's Rogers. When it's just your neighborhood and you're down, there's not a lot of sympathy. Like, even though it's still the same, and you know, we've experienced that even when there's a performance issue with one of our connections to our data center, it's so helpful just to be able to flop over to another provider because it's all set up just to validate what's going on, because people expect fast now. There's just no slow is not always an option.
It's a real-time world we live in, for sure.
Yeah.
And Kim touched on the fact that it's getting less expensive with the fiber connections, but it's really inexpensive now. Like with SD-WAN, you're putting money into hardware if you're switching over to that technology, right? There's hardware that you can put in that allows you to have an inactive, SIM that's just sitting there that you don't even really
SIM
have to
means
pay
cellular,
for.
right? I'm going to try to be okay.
Yeah.
But to give a quick example, like a product that we are moving a lot of these days is just a 5G modem that is dual carrier natively. So has Bell and Rogers in the same modem with instantaneous failover, right? And it's very cost effective. It's very fast. And you roll that out for your point of sale or your small branch office, and you have instantaneous failover that is very fast, broadband speeds, low latency on 5G network. The speed is increasing over time as the networks become more robust and they roll them out. And you have that instantaneous cross-carrier failover for very, very low fee, right? And ease of deployment, right? No installation. Put the modem where you want it, plug it in. So it's just, a beautiful product.
I want to get into 5G and what it all means, what we can expect in a minute. But I did want to ask, I believe, you can quiz me, SD-WAN stands for software-defined WAN. It's been out for quite a few years. Likely everybody knows what it is, but in case they don't, what is a software-defined WAN? What is SD-WAN?
Yeah, the easiest way to think about it is it's basically an edge device like a router, but it's doing a software-defined networking stack. So what you're going to get as a user is a really elegant portal where you can see all of your sites, all of the downstream devices, really great metrics and reporting. One of the key tenets is it does automatic orchestration of your VPNs between your users or your branches and your sort of core network. It takes in multiple circuits and then it deals with them intelligently for you, right? So I can load into most SD-WAN appliances 2 or 3 or 4 different types of broadband, and I can say to it, here's the bandwidth that each of these circuits have. Here, it will test the latency. It will determine which is best for voice traffic, which is going to have the best quality. It's doing a whole bunch of quality of service calculations, and it's shuffling my traffic intelligently over those broadband links. It's understanding and application aware. So it's actually doing deep packet inspection. It's looking, what is this traffic, right? And then it in a world where we have a failover, so if I have an SD-WAN appliance at a branch location and I have a really fast coax, and then I have a less fast ADSL, and then finally an LTE, and my cable goes down, right? I've suddenly lost a big chunk of bandwidth. My users have not gone down, but there's some things to me that are more important, right? Obviously, point of sale, critical. Can't have that not work. Need to process my transactions. Voice traffic with my customers, critical, right? So what it's going to do is look inside the flow. It's going to see what's most important to you, and it's going to prioritize that over like YouTube. And then what it actually can do is downshape that traffic. So like maybe my employees need to have YouTube, but what it's going to do is force that to be standard definition instead of high definition while I don't have bandwidth, right? So the user experience is still very good. But this device is intelligently through software reshaping the entire network and all its policies around the available bandwidth.
And the beautiful thing is, for the IT manager, leader, CIO, etc., they're just plugging in.
It's plug
all
and play.
Of that complexity is looked after for them.
Well, and typically with SD-WAN, you have a partner who is going to, set it up and manage it. But for the end user, it's very hands-off, other than the reporting functionality, which is very robust. Like with a lot of these appliances, you can drill down to, what is each user doing at what time of day, granular traffic on wireless users. If I'm a grocery store and I have a good SD-WAN deployment with integrated Wi-Fi, I can actually pick up off the Bluetooth beaconing and figure out traffic flows within my store, where if the same user comes in, I know it's the same user based on MAC address. And there's a lot of data that I can gather through my network by having appliances like that.
It's really, and I just think about, 10, 15 years ago, we were talking MPLS, VPLS, virtual private, and and those were prohibitively expensive, usually through one carrier. And now with SD-WAN, it's pretty remarkable. Yeah. Love to hear about some stories about practically how SD-WAN, deployments you may have done with customers and how you've levered SD-WAN to help organizations achieve their needs.
Yeah, and I can jump in there. And another thing I didn't mention before too is that these days are the broadband speeds, the cable, and the shared fiber speeds that we're seeing are getting so much better that there's a lot more options out there to do SD-WAN and not have to rely on a more expensive MPLS network or dedicated fiber. You're seeing gig shared fiber connections where maybe before you were limited by 15x1 DSL. The unfortunate thing is that not every location has equal infrastructure. Some businesses are luckier than others in terms of what's available. And that kind of goes back to the power of SD-WAN and what we do when we're looking at customers is saying, what's available at your location, what's the best, and then how can we build an affordable, resilient network. So, retail is a big segment for us. We have, a client that has retail locations across North America that I work with. And, our methodology there is saying, can we do a shared fiber, a broadband, a DSL as the primary, and then we're going to do 2 cellular SIMs. We're going to plug it into a PEP-Link device, which is a vendor that we sell quite often. That particular client also has a Meraki device on site. So you're getting all the functionality of the SD-WAN hardware, and then you're also getting, a very redundant network that's as affordable as possible, and they don't have to get really expensive connections. We also have clients, in the banking and lottery sectors where, if they can't process transactions, the stakes are pretty high, and just like with any other client, we're always preaching, have more than one carrier, let's pool your LTE across all of your sites using whatever cellular carrier is best at that location, and then have a dormant SIM that you can fail over to. And suddenly you have 3 different networks now. And, we find a lot of success with that. And, so we do that quite often for customers of all sizes. But, my biggest takeaway for anyone watching this is just try to have more than one carrier at each location, because outages do happen, and you might even save some money in the process.
Yeah. And if I'm connecting the dots between what Dan was saying earlier, Kim, and maybe Kelly, you could take this. TELUS and then Bell aren't necessarily as redundant as saying going TELUS and Rogers, or like try to have disparate ones that have different backends. Is that wise?
Yeah, for sure. They still have their own core infrastructure, so there is still some redundancy there, but they do. Bell and TELUS do share towers, right? So if something was to physically happen to the tower, then you would be down. Whereas you typically don't see Rogers sharing towers with TELUS and Rogers sharing towers.
But they have different back-end routers and stuff. So like an update that could happen to Rogers, that would be carrier dependent.
Would be carrier dependent, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And the one Kim mentioned pooling, which I think is important because a lot of people they're like, oh, well, I don't want to go the LTE route because there's data charges on LTE,
sure.
Right? But we're able to pool data across multiple carriers. So let's say you buy a package and you're flipping back and forth between, Rogers and TELUS. You're not paying a package for each of those connections. We pool it together for you.
You're getting a meta pool, which makes it so you don't care which carrier. So when we deploy it, we're just picking what carrier is best at your location, setting that as the primary, and then the other becomes the failover.
And we pool it by locations as well. So if you're, some of your customers might just have a couple, but in the case of Kim's examples, where you're dealing with national retailers that have hundreds of locations, that pool is for every single one of their locations. So one location might not be using any data, and other location
Sure.
might be using a lot of data, but it all just goes into one big pool. So LT can be expensive, but there's ways to make it less expensive.
That's a good point, which brings me to a question. I don't think I've asked you this before, but I'm imagining I'm listening here and I'm, let's say I'm an IT leader and I've got 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 locations and I've got 3 or 4 ISPs. How do you approach that? If somebody's already got some connectivity in place, do you take it over? Do you adjust it? How do you help organizations get from where they are now in their connectivity to this dream of a single plug-in multi-carrier topology with the redundancy and the benefits you just mentioned?
You want to take that, Kim?
Yeah, sure. So it depends on the circumstance. If, the customer is still in a contract with their existing provider, we can provide the SD-WAN hardware, plug in their connection, provide other connections as well. If they want us to manage all of the connections, maybe they're on month to month with, the agreement they had with the other carrier, then we can provide all of the circuits. So really we can customize it based on the customer, where they're at in their
and help them on that journey then, I guess, to where, okay.
Yeah, all of the above.
All right. Now I'm excited to talk about 5G, and the thing I'm actually excited about is to talk about Starlink, but we'll get there in a second. 5G, a lot of noise about it. It's been international with what are we gonna do about China and their Huawei devices. There's been rumors from my crazy uncle on Facebook that it's the reason why COVID was happening, or it's mind control. I don't know why why not 5G has been a topic like none other. And also that it'll be revolutionary for connectivity. I got 5G on my phone. It's fast. I don't feel my life has had a revolutionary change. So what is it? Like what's the buzz all about with 5G?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that one. And so there's a question from Brandon Peters. How does your approach differ when supporting rural networks as compared to urban? So I think that's related to this. So I'll try to work that in.
Okay, perfect.
But the biggest thing with 5G right now, so 5G networks in Canada is a really big place, right? There's a lot of area to cover. Where 5G will shine in the future is when there's high density of last mile nodes. 5G requires to have the antenna basically from the carrier be closer to the end user with lots of small access point. And so right now, there's not high density outside of major urban areas. But what is really compelling about 5G now, and why people should, if you were to ask me, should I buy a 5G modem over a non-5G modem for my point of sale or for my branch failover, or even a small site that has low bandwidth primary? Absolutely, because 5G, one of the key tenets of the technology is that it supports more bands concurrently. So 5G modem uses 4 different frequencies from the carrier at once. And so if you're using like a Cat6 modem, let's say an older generation LTE modem, that's only going to use 1 frequency. And if that frequency has problems or congestion, or there's just a lot of users in the area, or whatever's going on, you're going to have packet loss, you're going to have issues. Whereas a 5G modem really is almost like if I had to compare it to something like its own SD-WAN device, it has 4 different frequencies, it's multiplexing on, it's using them concurrently. So it's creating resiliency, it's automatically shifting between frequencies. As frequencies become bad, it's changing. So it's just a far more robust technology. And one of the beautiful things about it is, it is faster than, a Category 20 LTE-A modem, which was the generation before 5G. It's 150 meg. Really in the wild, you're seeing more like 80 meg. 5G modems in the wild, we're seeing customers getting 300 to 400 megabit down on a 5G modem today. But the beautiful thing is, what we're seeing is over time their speeds are increasing. So as the carriers increase their backhaul and increase the density, the modems are getting faster and faster, right? And so what broadband can you buy that just on its own without paying more becomes faster and faster over time, right?
So the advantage of 5. Sorry, go ahead, Kelly. What were you saying?
I was going to say I have a stat for you. So as of the end of March, 66.9% faster is the 5G network than the 4G LTE network. So it is faster. And like Dan said, it just keeps, if you keep watching that stat, it just keeps going up over time.
And for real-time services, it is faster and the latency is substantially lower and the packet loss is substantially lower, which is really important for sort of real-time rich media, right? So if you're going to use it as a primary service, which, you know, is with 5G is happening more and more, where people are saying, you know, I don't have, this is a small branch office, don't have a lot of rich media needs, I can make do within a, you know, 100 gig plan. 5G is a great fast way to deploy, there's no doubt. Or as a piece in an SD-WAN stack, right? To have a traditional cable backed up by a 5G or blended with a 5G makes total sense these days.
Well, I'm old enough and gray enough beard to remember, it wasn't that long ago, if you wanted a 100 meg connection to your office, and there wasn't one there, you're helping fund a $50,000 or whatever it is infrastructure bill to pull the fiber, pull the cable to your office, and hoping you can get everybody else in your neighborhood to participate, so you're not eating it all. And now you just plug in a modem, and that's that's bottom of the barrel kind of connectivity. It's amazing.
And so I said I'd answer Brandon's question. So how does our approach differ with rural? So rural locations and branches are really benefit from SD-WAN. And when we talk about SD-WAN, there is a lot of flavors of SD-WAN in how the circuit combination happens. And so we have a whole portfolio of SD-WAN devices we use basically as tools in our toolbox for whatever network we're trying to architect. So for instance, we have a major energy provider client in British Columbia, the primary gas provider. They had rural compressor sites all across British Columbia. And at those sites, they had a unique need. They have a regulatory compliance issue. They need high definition video streams 24/7 of these compressor sites for security. And these sites, you know, the only thing available there, you know, a lot of them is like really rural DSL that didn't have the upload they need. You know, they need 10 meg plus to be able to stream this definition. And so when you look at SD-WAN, there's two methodologies to creating more bandwidth. There's the link aggregation. That's sort of what the, you know, VeloCloud, Meraki, FortiGate, lots of those use. That's taking links and then it's sending out different streams of traffic, different sessions out different links, but it's not actually combining those links. Then you have other types of SD-WAN that do packet level load balancing. So what it's doing is actually creating tunnels to a carrier core. So like we run these aggregation cores in every province in Canada. And these are able to actually take, you know, I can take 10 ADSLs at a rural site and I can actually combine them all. It creates a tunnel over all of them and then it splits up the single session, so a single video stream, and spits it over all 10 ADSLs, right? So now I can create this big bandwidth that I can then actually present to, and we do this, we'll use one SD-WAN to make a whole bunch of small circuits into one big circuit, and then we'll present that to an SD-WAN device that does you know, user level bandwidth shaping and the link aggregation to combine with other things like 5G. And so what we actually ended up doing at these compressor stations is at some of them, there's a whole bunch of ADSL combined into big links, and then those big links are going into a Meraki stack. And you know, there's a secondary failover to LTE or 5G modems to sort of up the bandwidth. And the beautiful thing is, because you don't want to burn a lot of bandwidth on cellular because it's expensive, what you can do with some of the load balancing algorithms is you can say, only use this LTE for upload, enhance my upload, but don't put any download over it, right? Or only use it when I have demand for more than 10 megs, because I know my cheap commodity bandwidth can cover me to 10 megs. But when I have user demand for 11, 12, 13 megabit, turn on that LTE and combine it, right? That kind of logic lets you be cost efficient while creating the bandwidth you need and solving the problem that you have.
Go ahead, sorry.
You and I are just chatting together today.
On the same line, yeah.
I was just gonna say, to answer the question, maybe a good is to provide a customer example. So we have we service a lot of rural wireless providers, and we had one provider just recently in Saskatchewan, and he had his equipment on a bell tower, and they were decommissioning the tower. And so he was servicing all these customers. He's like, what am I going to do? I don't have access to this tower anymore. Anyways, he called us because we were providing the fiber connection into his, head end. And we ended up deploying for him, and we can get into this a little bit more when we talk about satellite, but we ended up deploying for him in these really rural locations using SD-WAN along with a satellite connection and LTE. And we were able to turn those up, and he was able to continue to service those customers without having access to that bell tower anymore. Yeah. So there's really cool solutions you can do, not only with, cellular, but also with what's happening now with all these low orbit satellites that are going up.
Yeah, he actually ended up with more bandwidth than he was getting from his wireless backhaul, where he had to pay for big fiber connections, had to try to get it extended, pay big builds. And, literally we took multiple Starlink connections, bonded them with some 5G, ran it through a caching engine for him and a compression engine to maximize that last mile bandwidth. And his users now have a better user experience, faster experience than they did, with a fiber fed backhaul over a wireless link. And that kind of technology now you can drop anywhere in the world.
It's really interesting. It changes what you think about, because we used to just consuming like, okay, what's the best internet I can get at a given location or a given building, and that's your only option. And this really changes the landscape. I do want to get into LEO because that's super exciting for me. But first, there's an acronym I need your help with. I've heard about it in relation to 5G. I think it's a LoRaWAN, if I'm saying that right. LORAWAN. How is that said? I don't even know if I've heard it said before.
Yeah, you're saying it right, LoRaWAN.
Am I? Yeah. I get a cookie. And what is it?
So it's relational to 5G only in that it competes with it. So what LoRaWAN is there's a bunch of really neat, innovative networks that are being pushed out across North America and actually globally that allow you to have very long range, very low power IoT sensors that don't rely on cellular backhaul. So you've got projects like Helium and others like that, where users are putting access points on their home internet or internet, and it's creating a secure bubble that's roughly like 8 miles large around each user that joins the network, that creates this bubble of connectivity, very low bandwidth, but for sensor data. So like, I'll give you an example of a current use case. So if I'm a large waste management company and I want to optimize my routes and pickups of dumpsters, I want to know when they are half full or almost full, right? So that I can not show up and pick up a half empty dumpster. I want to put a sensor in it. Today, if I want to put a sensor in it and get that data, there's a couple ways I can do it. Either I have to have it close enough to a route where my truck can pick up that data, which is, not really viable, or I end up having to have a cellular modem or some sort of connectivity that can talk to a sensor that's in that device. Or I can use LoRaWAN to join a LoRaWAN network and have a sensor that, has a 3 to 5 year battery life and talks to this network with a technology that has like an 8 kilometer range, where I don't have the cellular cost, right? And cellular cost is twofold. Like, the plans are really expensive, but what's even harder is if I am trying to sensorify in a building that I don't control or in the wild, how do I get backhaul, right? I need somewhere to plug in a modem. I have a $800 to $1,500 ruggedized cellular modem to put in, and a plan, and it needs power, right? Those are all complicated challenges to IoT and to sensorification. And LoRaWAN solves for that, because I literally just have a little sensor that is heat, light, pressure, whatever I'm trying to gather, that is going to last there 5 years and will join a large LoRaWAN network. So it's
like
a competitive
self-powered
offering.
Is what you're saying, Dan? Like, would it have a little battery pack?
It just has a battery, but the technology itself is just ultra low power. Right?
Oh, I see.
So it can pull back IoT sensor data for years and years and years, and the devices are really inexpensive, like tens of dollars, not thousands of dollars, to sensorify something.
So it occurs to me that makes a lot of sense for SCADA or systems that are kind of out there in the field. But I'm even thinking, like, if you've got a shop and you don't have it all wired up and you need to have certain sensor data, maybe safety data, maybe like you said, environmental monitoring. This is
when you see that happening, because Wi-Fi networks are complex and they're expensive to roll out. And if you don't have a user need, but you have a large, you're a manufacturer with a big campus and a lot of obstruction, Wi-Fi is hard to get the density you need. LoRaWAN is a much longer range technology because of the frequency it uses, and the sensors are much cheaper than Wi-Fi sensors. So
excellent. Well, I just learned a whole pile. I hope some of the audience did. And this isn't our first time talking about 5G, Dan. So like I said, every time I learned something.
Yeah.
I'd like to move into something that's a little closer to my heart, LEO, and that's because I'm a space nerd. So 10-year-old Devon still loves space. He's still inside of here. I'll start with a little explanation and see if I've gotten this right. So people think about the satellites. I think some people think about the satellites that are, binding us together and providing us connectivity, and they're whirling around the International Space Station, hopefully not colliding into things. But in fact, traditionally, they've been way out, not in low Earth orbit, but in geosynchronous orbit, which is partway to the moon, and so that they're orbiting at the same rotation as the Earth, so that they're always up there, which means your connectivity needs to go all the way up there and all the way back. And it's like 2.5 seconds or something like that just to get to the moon. It's not quite that far, but the fact is, the one thing nobody has figured out how to solve is the speed of light. It seems to be the speed limit of the universe. So low Earth orbit then puts a whole bunch of little satellites right closer to the Earth that are spinning around, hopefully not colliding with other things, right? Spinning around down there. And that has revolutionized the connectivity. That is as much as I know. I still thought this was a little pie in the sky. I heard a few people that are plugging into it. I understand this has become real world recently. People are levering it. I'd love to hear about what you're seeing.
Yeah, it's absolutely real world, and there's many very large players investing a ton in it, and it is absolutely going to transform the industry. They are the satellite. Basically, it's like cell towers in space is the best analogy I have for you. The low orbit, they're only 500 kilometers away as opposed to thousands of kilometers away. The latency is then low. One of the biggest problems with satellite historically was the latency was very high, which made voice applications and real-time media near impossible. The throughput is much higher also because of the difference in technology. They're using newer antenna technology and newer ground station technology that just is able to move a whole lot more bandwidth. But I'd say it's very usable right now. We've been playing with it and deploying it to augment customer networks, especially in the digital desert for over a year now. We've been
digital desert. I'm assuming that means places where there's nothing.
Yeah,
reasonable.
and nothing. I'm in northern Canada, and I have a medical clinic, and I need to have send X-ray data and real-time imagery. Wonderful solution, right? Like there are no cell towers. You can still use SD-WAN. You can bond them. You can bond. We've bonded 4 Starlinks together to create a near gigabit connection in the north. You can use SD-WAN along with it. But what I'll say is, the leading provider there obviously is Starlink. Starlink a year ago versus Starlink today, as they add users, the technology is I would say linearly decreasing in speed as more users are added to the network, which happens with any network, right? You have a contention ratio. You have more users sharing the same satellites, sharing the same downlinks to the same ground stations. So a year ago, you'd see sort of 300 megabit per Starlink. Now you're seeing more like 80 to 100 on average.
The difference if you're the first guy to the Stampede breakfast or if you show they're half an hour late. It's just a lot of different, yeah.
But 100 in the middle of nowhere is still amazing. 100 megabit, reliable.
Fair enough.
The one thing I'll say is because it is new and there are still some gaps, there is some periods where the dish will have constant fade through the day. So there's periods where Starlink is very fast, and then as that satellite moves by before you get on the next satellite, your speed dips, and so it's not a set speed, it's sort of a wave. And in that wave, as you get to the bottom of the wave, sometimes you do have some packet loss. So one of the best things you can do if you want to leverage the bandwidth of it is use a SD-WAN technology that can bond it with 5G, but have it focus most of the bandwidth on the Starlink. So as the Starlink fades, the 5G modem gets called in augments it, make sure there's no loss, right? If there's any packet loss on the Starlink, all the traffic heads out the 5G modem or the LTE modem. And this can create literally anywhere a highly robust, highly reliable connection that takes the speed of the Starlink, but the reliability of the LTE and combines them. And that's a great way to do non-urban locations with really good speed.
Am I right to suggest that I'm thinking that as Starlink throws more satellites up, they'll hopefully overcome that, or are they kind of at capacity already with the density of satellites?
My understanding is it's more of a ground station limitation. They need a lot more ground stations pushing a lot more bandwidth into the network, and
interesting. Okay.
It also just is a new technology, right? Like they're making big updates and changes constantly, and they're rolling out new evolutions of dishes, and they're moving into commercial space, which is creating a whole other, with faster throughput, 500 meg guaranteed connections. Those are eating away at the non-premium, non-business links. But that technology is evolving super rapidly, and it is really interesting because it solves for a lot of problems. And the way we look at it, like what iTel does, we have in Canada close to 100 providers on a backbone that we've built coast to coast. Starlink is just one more tool in the box for us to roll out and solve customer problems.
Yeah.
And that's how we're already using it, and it solves a lot of problems.
I love that. By the way, if everybody doesn't know, these satellites are relatively small that are flying around up there. And I just this week was following NASA, because yes, I'm a nerd and I follow NASA, and they're experimenting with this system, which is mind blowing. It actually will chuck these little satellites into space. There's no rocket.
I've seen that.
Spins them up and
centrifuge.
Crazy idea that we could get there. All right, excellent. So we have talked about SD-WAN, we have talked about LEO, we've talked about LoRaWAN. Another acronym I want to bring up, SASE or SaaS, it's SASE. So the genuine question, what is it, and why should business owners care?
Yeah, for sure. So I wore my network nerd shirt for this one because this one gets
if we weren't nerdy enough already.
Yeah,
okay.
So SASE is really interesting, but it's really just the next evolution of where all this virtualization of network was going, right? So you had this virtualization of your WAN and all this SD-WAN stuff we talked about today. But the other big trends that were happening in telecom and in the industry is you had a lot of customers moving to cloud, right? And they were building out cloud infrastructure. They're building out apps in the cloud. Their own SaaS providers were providing software in the cloud. And that created a problem because it sort of expanded the network perimeter from like what was my branch and became my branch in a data center to my branch, a data center, my users who work from home, and my cloud provider who has my infrastructure in it. And I had this great big bubble, which created security problems. And so SASE is the term for a stacking and hyper virtualization of a whole bunch of technologies to sort of deal with that. And so what it is it's SD-WAN, either through an appliance at a prem or an access point that does automatic tunneling for like a home user that securely tunnels back those users and those branches into a network that's provided by a service provider. So like iTel has an SD-WAN offering, we run concentrators in our network. So instead of you having an SD-WAN core, your carrier has an SD-WAN core, your carrier then provides your firewall, like inline virus scanning in the network, inline malware detection, all DDoS protection at the edge for your bandwidth. For your users, there's generally in a lot of the solutions a security agent that's doing this zero trust, authentication. And then you have built-in cloud ramps. So like before, if you wanted a layer 2, just to lower your cost, if you wanted a layer 2 connection from a branch location to a cloud provider, you had to get to a data center, use an on-ramp, or pay for big wavelengths, or to right to that cloud provider is very expensive. So what's happened is service providers have rolled that in as a service. So if you're working with us and we have an SD-WAN network for you, concentrators in our data center, we're extending you to the cloud without you having to buy the expensive ramp, without you having to buy that interconnect or that fiber, and it's all done just as a service. So it's your entire network, your cloud on-ramp, your security, your SD-WAN, your trust framework, and your cloud ramp all rolled into one virtualized service. You don't need staff who know how to operate it. You don't need a whole bunch of engineers who understand, a lot of these complex topics. And it's just a fully encompassed network, including your cloud, in one packaged solution. That's sort of the easiest way I have to describe it. And it's taking out a whole lot of hardware that companies otherwise would have managed, right? Like the firewall is gone. The edge security appliances are gone. A lot of the complex routing architecture is gone. It's all virtualized and provided by your service provider.
I mean, when you describe these, what I'm always struck by is how highly complex and sophisticated they are on the back end, but how easy they are to consume, which is ultimately what we're all trying to do, right?
That's the point. Yeah, it's ease of consumption, like a simple online portal where it's more just language driven. For the few clicks, you can add a link to Amazon or Google or AWS within your network without having to go buy and consume and build architecture. Like that's the easiest way to describe it. It's just beautifully elegant and easy.
Excellent. Well, I wanna kind of walk back through, because we've covered the topics I wanted to talk. Please, any question and answer, we've got a few in there. We'll share. And I did want to share something. Emily Anderson, who's a marketing lead at iTel, pointed us to itel.com/telecom-acronyms glossary. I'll put that up on the stage here for a quick second, because as I was saying, there is an awful lot of acronyms, and it's nice to have a source you can go to get to get them as easily resolved and answered as possible. And thank you very much for humoring me on my questions about it. But I'm going to go through and I'm just going to ask a question of each of you. What's the one thing you think, somebody who's listened in today, what's the one thing you'd like them to take away? What piece of knowledge or item would you like them to walk away with and consider about their topology, their security, their connectivity? One little tidbit, why they might want to think about how they're joining their branch offices or their home users in a little bit of a different way. Hopefully I've talked long enough to give you time to think about that. Who would fall in? Kim, can I ask you first? What do you think the audience might want to take away from this, or should take away from this?
Yeah, absolutely. And, oftentimes when I'm looking at customer networks, maybe, I'll often hear, we have such and such carrier, they're so reliable, they're a great carrier. Why would I ever need to have a second one? And, I do think that, as unfortunate as it was with the Rogers outage that happened, I just want to illuminate the fact that, there's lots of great carriers out there, but you can't rely on every carrier being, having 100% uptime. So no matter how great the carrier is, this is true of all internet providers, just try to have a second one. It makes a big difference. So that would be the main takeaway that I want people to have.
Well, thanks, Kim. That's terrific. Kelly, do you mind if I slide over to you? Same question.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway?
I think for me, you mentioned earlier, I've spent a lot of time in this industry, and I think, coming from a big carrier and then coming over to iTel, I've just experienced time and time again, companies are constantly trying to figure out what connectivity they can get. And they put that on themselves to figure it out. It's like, oh, I got to call Shaw, and then I got to call TELUS, and then I got to call Rogers. And then half the time, they don't even have the whole picture. And so I think the takeaway here is, if you're struggling, if you don't have something that's meeting your needs, if you don't have enough bandwidth at either your primary location, your remote location, or you're struggling with your network, there is solutions out there and ways that it can be resolved, and it doesn't have to be you doing it. So
love that message, Kelly. And I'll even say, without naming any names, that at times, even after you've called all those individual companies, and if they have to do any kind of back-end work to get you an answer about the connectivity at a location, you may not hear from them, or you may hear back from them in an insane amount of time after they've done some engineering study or something, and it all gets complex. And it's great to have a partner that can take that burden of figuring out the answers
And we're agnostic. Like, whether if you want to use a specific carrier, okay, we'll use that carrier for you, right? Like, if you really like working with Shaw, you like their bandwidth, you like their service, you've had great experience, like, we can tie that all in. And Dan always uses this, like, in a way, iTel is the hotels.com of telecom, right? It's just going out there and putting all the pieces together so that you don't have to do it. Like, your business, I'm assuming on the call, is not telecommunications, right? So why are you having to figure this out?
Yeah, same pitch we make about IT, right? That's what F12's there for. Well, you have better things to do than spend your time figuring this out, and it always changes. Dan, Mr. CEO, you get the final word as to what takeaway you'd like for the audience.
I'd probably say, so we as you pointed out elegantly, there's a lot of acronyms. We talked about a lot of sort of next gen technology today. It sounds complex, which probably makes people think it sounds expensive. The thing I would point out is one of the leading things that these next generation SD-WAN technologies solve for is actually expense reduction. So if you're a company who has MPLS links, or a legacy Ethernet network, or a network that you haven't reviewed for, I would say, more than 3 years, there will be substantial savings along with substantial feature set enhancement and visibility for you by looking at these technologies. They are comparatively very inexpensive, and most of our customers actually end up saving quite a bit by moving to SD-WAN away from legacy routing. So that would be the biggest thing I would point out, is don't think that it's it's going to break the bank. It's actually a more of a cost savings exercise than anything.
Well, this was a treat to have 3 executives from an organization I admire and have worked with for such a long time. If you're an F12 customer and you're listening and you're curious about this, know that Kim's our national partner manager. Your account manager has a direct line to iTel to help you navigate and get the conversation started. iTel is one of the few, we have a select pool of trusted solutions partners, everything from application development to security, in this case, connectivity across the board. And F12's part of our job is to make sure we connect you with the great, ethical, phenomenal companies, and iTel is certainly one of them. So reach out, and of course, itel.com, really easy to find. You can find out more information about the services. That's it. I think we can let you all get about your day. Thank you again for joining us, and to everyone else, just a reminder, we'll have this recorded and we'll get a blog article summarizing the content. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.